Hello and welcome back to Arts of Hermes. This is part 2 out of 3 of our video on the surrealist artist and writer Leonora Carrington. So if you've not seen part 1, I definitely recommend that you watch that first, as we'll be picking up really exactly where we left off with part 1. And in fact, we'll actually be starting off with about 45 or so minutes worth of material that was actually originally recorded to be part of part 1. So we'll open up with some good discussion on tarot and tarot imagery in her work. Then we'll kind of open up and talk a bit about ecology and the role of animals in her work. We'll spend a bunch of time looking at a complex esoteric diagram that she drew called the Map of the Human Animal. That I think is an important key to some of her symbolism and her view of the world. So I think that's worth the time spent on it. Then from there, we will transition over to some newly recorded material, the material that I'm about to record here on feminism and ecofeminism in Carrington's works, including a decent discussion about an important essay of hers entitled What is a Woman? And then finally, we'll wrap up with a brief discussion of the novella The Stone Door, which originally I had planned on doing a longer, more in-depth discussion, but we'll talk about some of the reasons when we get there. But yeah, in any case, here we go, picking back up with where we left off and talking about the tarot. All right, so we've already mentioned a few tarot references in some of the images. As with a lot of these things, they're so interwoven with other esoteric and mythological references that it's really impossible to separate them out. But we can sort of take a little more detailed look at her engagement with the tarot, and in particular the paintings that she did of some of the tarot cards. So after her death, this set of 22 tarot, the designs for the 22 tarot trumps was discovered. These were never shown or exhibited in her lifetime, and in a few cases I think it's not totally clear whether they were really finished. She sometimes did multiple designs for some of the trumps, and these were done approximately in 1955. The exact date's not known, but in some cases she returned to some of the designs later and did alternate versions of them. So yeah, certainly something she was engaged in, but yeah, never exactly completed, and we don't know that she was ever really fully satisfied with the designs. So just something to keep in mind, but nevertheless, I think they're a beautiful set of images, and the tarot being such an important key to a lot of her works and something that she so constantly referenced, seeing her own designs for these things is extremely instructive. So for the most part, she's drawing on the imagery from two of the major decks. First of all, the Tarot de Marseille, which is the major reference point for really most of the surrealists who are using tarot, especially the French surrealists. They're really pretty devoted to the Tarot de Marseille. So she's definitely drawing a lot on those traditional designs, though she's also possibly because of her own background, coming from England, she's also drawing on the deck that's usually referred to as the Rider-Waite deck. I always prefer to call it the Smith-Waite deck because I think, giving Waite the sort of the credit for it rather than Pamela Coleman Smith always seems a bit of an injustice. I think he certainly his ideas and designs for the trumps are certainly an important contribution to that deck, but it's obviously her art and the really timeless beauty of those of her designs for that deck that makes it the most famous and enduring tarot deck. But in any case, those are her two major sources. I also see in some of her tarot designs what I think are references to Oswald Wirth's designs for the tarot. In particular, like with this card, the Fool here, the Fool's head tipped back and the pointed beard. We see that same image or that same design for the Fool in Wirth's design for that card. So that's, I think, possibly a sort of tertiary reference there for her. Wirth was an important author on the tarot in the late 19th century France, something of a student, or I don't know how much he literally studied with him, but definitely continuing on in the tradition of Eliphas Levi. And a source for some of the other surrealists as well, like for Victor Brauner, for example, who we talked about in the surrealism video, I think was also influenced by Wirth's writings on the tarot. All right, another example of her designs from this mid-1950s set of images that she did. Here we have the design for the tarot. So we can see her, drawing on traditional images. Also really these are very minimalist, simplified designs, which is interesting to see her working in that sort of mode. Now, I don't think anyone's come to any kind of conclusion about why she's choosing the color schemes for the deck that she is. They don't match any known correspondence or any really obvious symbolism. So that's, I think, kind of an intriguing point about these cards is the question of the color schemes that she's choosing. And you can see her adapting them to her own purposes and her own sets of sort of symbolism and all that. And obviously she's liking or drawing on this the black and white sphinxes, resonating with that constant theme in her work of the black and white, the opposites. All right, so here we have an example of a painting that's not exactly a design for a tarot trump, but is very explicitly drawing on, or is a kind of version of a tarot trump. So here we are drawing on the Chariot card, but also substantially modifying it. We also see her drawing on a second tarot card, the World, or what's the card is sometimes called the Universe, where we see the four symbolic creatures in the four corners. So here we have four magical creatures, each directly connected to one of the four elements in the four corners of the painting. So an interesting combination of the elements of two different cards. And we also see here the expansion of the two sphinxes into a triad of magical creatures here. So we see a black goose, referring again to that figure that we talked about in the Chrysopoeia of Mary the Jewess painting that we saw a few minutes ago. Here the black goose returns. And paired with a white ox here. And we also have a third magical creature, which perhaps could be associated with the red as the completion of that alchemical triad. Though this creature is definitely fantastic. Also emphasizing that the triad here is the red triangle behind the figure in sort of a double figure on the chariot. Also, the title is pretty interesting. This is Molly Malone's Chariot. So Molly Malone is a well-known figure from sort of Irish culture and the popular folk song that I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with. I always just think of Clockwork Orange when I think of that song. But Molly Malone was what do you call it? A fishwife or a hawker who had a cart, from which she sold her wares. But here that cart is being, reinterpreted as the magical vehicle from the tarot, which is another interesting example of appropriating a figure, from a figure of a woman from culture and mythology, and then reinterpreting her as a powerful magical being. All right, and then here we see on the right her design for the Devil card of the tarot. And here she's drawing not just on the designs from the three decks that we mentioned, but she's drawing also on Eliphas Levi's interpretation or design for this card, the fairly well-known figure of Baphomet there on the left. But understanding that this figure that for Levi, was a version of the Devil card of the tarot. So definitely demonstrating her really sophisticated understanding and her wide knowledge of the esoteric tradition and her deep understanding of it, for sure. All right, just another example of the use and kind of modification and adaptation of tarot imagery. So on the left we have not a very good image of her design for the Hermit card of the tarot. And on the right, we have a really humorous, but also really beautiful. I think the use of color in this painting is really gorgeous. her painting, The Artist Travels Incognito. So a kind of a portrait of the artist, sort of in the guise of the hermit, but also quite modified. So we see the hermit's staff is transformed into an umbrella, and then the hermit's lantern here becomes a bird cage with a parrot inside of it, which is quite a funny adaptation of that imagery. The artist also here is some kind of a hybrid sort of being, looking a bit like a pantomime horse, but we also see on the right a kind of cyclops cat head emerging out from the back of the figure. We see another cat down at the bottom investigating the pinned-on tail there. The artist herself has 5 eyes, so really interesting, fantastic painting. But yeah, I think those really rich gold colors with the rose and then the pale blue and turquoise background and the green of the parrot is just a really beautiful combination of color and showing Carrington as a really great colorist. All right, and then here we have Carrington's design for Trump number 12, the Hanged Man. Now, this is an image that occurs again and again throughout her works, one of the most common tarot images that appears in many of her works throughout her career. Despite the ubiquity, but really, as always with Carrington, I think it's really not possible to give a definite, consistent meaning to this image. But I think we should rather see it again as an image that holds some sort of power or resonance or significance for her that she's returning to again and again to revisit and reinterpret and to place in new contexts. I think that seeing it as something of an experimental sort of approach of working with this image and processing it is maybe more fruitful than thinking of it as something that is a definite meaning that just gets stamped onto a variety of different works. But here in this design, for the card, we can see a fairly traditional, straightforward depiction of the image. We see very prominently the alchemical colors of black, white, and red. We also see the Hanged Man's hair here is done with gold foil. So possibly drawing on the image that we see in the Smith Waite version of this card, where the Hanged Man's head is surrounded by a halo or nimbus, referring to enlightenment or spiritual wisdom. But here that's just been transformed into the Hanged Man's hair, which I think is an interesting, a kind of interesting way of varying or manipulating that image. The hangman can be given a variety of different meanings in different sources. I think we definitely see the significance of the hangman referring to willingly undergoing trial and suffering, and a suffering that leads to enlightenment and to wisdom. Sometimes the hangman is connected to the myth of Odin, suspending himself from the Yggdrasil for 9 days, I think, in order to learn the secret of the runes. So I think that's maybe a potent resonance there. I think it also really resonates with some of the things that we said about the narrative in Down Below, undergoing this period of trial and crisis, but emerging from the other side. And this could also be understood in a very definitely alchemical way. The alchemical process is very much one of destruction and darkness that ultimately leads towards perfection and the production of gold, or the philosopher's stone, the elixir, and so on. And the appearance, the prominence of the alchemical colors here in this card, I think, really emphasizes that sort of interpretation, that trial that leads to wisdom is a version of the alchemical process, or is understood alchemically. All right, so here this is an interesting painting for a number of reasons. The rabbis here, we see the hangman over on a version of the hangman over on the left-hand side of the image. Also, there's a lot we could say about this painting, but we should probably just keep moving on. But another appearance of that, the dark sort of animal figure emerging from below the dress of the figure on the right, who also may be interesting noted here too that the painting is titled the Rabbis, but the figure on the right is female. So here we have an insertion of a kind of heretical image of a female rabbi. Again, I think connecting to a lot of things that we've already said about her use and appropriation of religious and mythical imagery, and the wresting away of those images from patriarchal culture. All right, and then we have The Burning of Giordano Bruno from 1964, done the same year that Frances Yates releases her really epical book, The Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition. So, although Carrington's approach to these images and traditions is so personal, we definitely see that she also is keeping up with the literature and is interested in the scholarly and historical studies of these traditions. So we see in this painting, if there's any doubt about the connection between this painting and Yates's book, we see some of these geometric cosmological diagrams that are all reproduced in Yates's book in this image as well. Similar to some of the images that we also saw in the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra and in some of her other works. We also see some of this geometric structure and a number of magical figures and beings around the painting. But the central image that we see is Giordano Bruno himself. Again, maybe a little bit hard to see in this image, but we see him there in the lower center, where we see him being burned, as he was actually executed. He was burned at the stake. But here we have him depicted suspended upside down, which is not, a historically accurate representation, but is symbolically linking him to the hanged man of the tarot, which I think is a quite interesting interpretation of Bruno and of the symbolic significance of his execution. All right, and then here we have a really interesting painting that incorporates all 22 of the tarot cards into its design. So in this doubled or reflected feminine figure that we see here, we've got all 22 of the designs incorporated into her garment, with the sun card most prominent in the large diamond in the center there, and then the other 21 cards much smaller, arranged around her dress. So this doubled reflected figure, as well as the suggestion of a hexagram with downward and upward pointing triangles and intersecting triangles here, I think could be interpreted as a reference to an image from Eliphas Levi of God reflected in the waters, and God and his reflection forming a hexagram. Now, this for Levi refers to an idea that's quite important to his theology and his Kabbalah of God having both a light and a dark side, or a good and an evil aspect. But here we have, for Carrington, a feminine or a goddess version of that image, which, interestingly, so the sun very prominent on her garment, but then she's also connected to lunar symbolism. So the lower figure is superimposed over a thin crescent moon, which we see sort of shining through her hair there. And then just above and to the right of the upper figure, we see the full moon over the head of perhaps a bull or cow image there, maybe a reference to the Egyptian goddess Hathor, though it's, I think, slightly ambiguous what animal we're looking at here, but some sort of magical horned animal connected to the full moon. So with the full moon above and the new or crescent moon below, I think we get that idea of a light and a dark aspect, though here they're united into the single image of the moon, which in her cycle moves from light to darkness and from darkness to light. So both that light and dark are here kind of incorporated together and are seen as part of a cyclical motion, which I think is a really interesting kind of intervention or changing of that more patriarchal image of God, which is still dual, but here we have that duality, I think, more unified and incorporated into a beautiful feminine image. The sun in the center, perhaps also suggests the goddess as giving birth to the sun, which is something we get in some Egyptian mythology. So if we want to go to that kind of Egyptian angle of interpretation, we could see her also as the mother of the sun. We also have her wearing a feather boa that turns into, I think, another version of that dark or shadow sort of creature that we see in a number of Carrington's paintings, which, maybe with this image of dark and light and sort of doubling and reflecting, perhaps the creature is like the shadow of the sun, or else is connected to the painting is more or less divided in half. We have a celestial, night sky above, and then the earth below. So it's either connected to the earth below, or we could see as the shadow, perhaps like cast by the sun. But I think, again, referring to the sort of dualities and the incorporation of darkness into the image of the whole. Also, I think the 22 trumps like appearing over her garment shows her as a universal image. The 22 trumps are often understood, especially when they're connected to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, are understood as a complete map, of the universe and of the spiritual path and the individual being. So certainly an image of completion and totality and wholeness, and containing both the darkness and the light and all aspects. We also have, I find a really intriguing image here in the upper portion of the painting. We have what appears to be an octopus in the night sky here, which, I don't know, feels quite Lovecraftian to me. I don't know that Carrington ever read Lovecraft, though we do know that Remedios Varo in her library after she died, she had at least one book of Lovecraft's in her library. So it's possible Carrington was familiar with that image. But yeah, I've always been intrigued by this kind of star octopus coming out of the night sky there. All right, and then here we have a very complex painting that we definitely could spend a lot of time with, but we'll just talk about real briefly for the sake of time. This is actually a portrait of an analyst that she did, a psychoanalyst that she did a course of analysis with, and she eventually gave this to him as a gift. So we see him actually 3 times in the work, most prominently like in the center here, though we also see him again on the left and again in the upper right. So we see him connected to several different groups of images here. A lot going on, but we see a number of tarot images incorporated into the design. And I think here we get the impression that these images are not necessarily specific references to the tarot, but the tarot here, I think, is just functioning as a resource or a repository of images that she can draw on. But she's also drawing on all sorts of other sources of imagery and invented fantastic creatures. They just become images among others and sources of fantastic imagery. So let's see, over on this doorway here, we see kind of foreshortened an image of the Hanged Man card, and then above that, the moon. So there we see the lobster or crayfish and the 2 towers there. And then over on the left side, we see a version of the star card, which this is a really interesting design where normally we have the woman pouring water. We here have, so in the traditional design for the star card, there's also a bird that appears in the image. And in some esoteric interpretations of the tarot, that bird is understood to be an ibis. And so here the woman is given what appears to be a bird head, and maybe we could interpret it as an ibis head, though it's a little unclear. But yeah, really interesting and complex image. So it's also one of the few Carrington paintings that I've actually been able to see in person. I saw it at the Tate Modern when I was in London, which was a really nice opportunity to see one of her works in person. All right, so here we have a photograph of the set and costume design so she did the set and costume design for a play that she also wrote called Penelope, which I really don't know much of anything about this play. Never had a chance to read. I don't know if the script exists or is available, and I don't really know anything about the story or the characters involved in the play other than looking at this image. The play was directed or staged by Alejandro Jodorowsky, the filmmaker who we've mentioned before and we'll definitely look at again in a future video, especially his film The Holy Mountain. There's an interesting story that Jodorowsky tells about undergoing a kind of initiation at Carrington's hand, which I think if you read the account, there's definitely room for wondering whether it's actually a true story or not, or whether it's simply a sort of self-mythologizing. But perhaps even especially if it is self-mythologizing, I think it's quite striking that he spent time in Paris and knew André Breton and a number of the other Parisian surrealists. So I think it's quite interesting that he would choose Carrington as in order to invest himself with a kind of magical power, that he would choose Carrington as the figure to claim this initiation from. Certainly a testament there to the perception of her as knowledgeable and invested with a magical and initiatory power. All right, so in the set and costume design here, we see a whole bunch of esoteric images, a few tarot images. So we have yet another appearance of the Hangman here on the left. We also have, now this would be a design from, or a version of the Ace of Staves from the Marseille deck, which in the esoteric interpretation of the tarot and then most later decks, this becomes the Ace of Wands. So I think this is the only example that we've seen so far of a tarot reference that isn't one of the 22 trumps. So yeah, that's interesting there as well. Let's see, we also see a number of magical creatures, a kind of centaur or some sort of lion centaur looking creature there on the left. Though I suppose it's possible the actor is just standing behind the figure. It's a little hard to tell, and like I said, I don't actually know anything about the play. We also see the sun, quite large, looking down over the whole image there. We also have a number of Solomonic looking seals or sigils here. We see one here, and then that same one again repeated on this animal-headed figure's cloak there. Now, I don't particularly recognize this sigil. If anyone does recognize it, definitely let me know. It definitely looks Solomonic, but I can't place it specifically. We also have this seal here, which is definitely a version of the secret seal from is that from the Lesser Key of Solomon? I always get the lesser key and the key mixed up, but yeah, that's from a kind of version of the secret seal of Solomon there. We also have another sort of Hathor image of the horned, the cow-headed goddess with. I'm not quite sure what that is, rising up between her horns, but yeah, another version of that image. We see more magical sigils and seals here. So yeah, very complex and intriguing image that I'd love to know more about. All right, so there's so many more examples that we could give of the prevalence of the presence of esotericism in Carrington's works, and we'll continue to see them as we go through here and continuing on in part 2. But yeah, I just wanted to move to expand out beyond the confines of specifically those esoteric traditions of practice and symbolism, and look at some of the broader social and kind of global concerns of Carrington. So first, animals and ecology. So as we've already seen, lots of images of animals and scenes of the natural world throughout her works. Sometimes real animals, sometimes fantastic or hybrid, sometimes human-animal hybrids or humans transforming into animals. As we already referenced there, I think there is also that interesting engagement with those, or kind of appropriation of the negative image of the witch's Sabbath, where the witches transformed into animals. That idea is sort of reclaimed and interpreted instead as an image of power and connection to the animal world. Which is something I think that connection to the animal nature is something that Carrington felt very strongly. So let's see. Yeah, so in this image here, we see her own identification with horses, and that the horse, really functioned as an important totem for her, especially in her early works. She, as a young woman, really, really enjoyed horseback riding and had a very close relationship with horses. And yeah, especially in the early years, the horse appears in her paintings as a kind of personal totem or a figure that she identifies with, which is also reported, or we also see in some of her writings as well, that identification with horses, which especially during the time that she was with Max Ernst, we see her identification with the horse and his identification with the bird, and we see bird and horse images, appearing in both of their works or in images of each other. So yeah, we see here both the rocking horse on the wall there, though it seems to be rather animated, almost as if it's leaping towards the window, and then out the window we see a horse in a very similar posture running. So an interesting sort of link between the real horse and the rocking horse, which we also know that she had a rocking horse as a child that was quite important to her, that she refers to in some of her writings. And then, yeah, we see Carrington here. This is also, I think, notable as a rare self-portrait. She really did very, very few self-portraits over the course of her career. And we see her, yeah, adopting this very kind of potent, powerful stance there in the chair. The chair itself is quite, I don't know how clear it's going to be on your screen there, but if you look up close at this image, the chair itself is kind of a feminine image. The arms are arms, and we see its legs have shoes on that are little kind of high-heeled boots that are very similar to the ones that she's wearing. And then with the skirt itself, yeah, really appearing as a kind of feminine image. And then this bright red of the seat here has been interpreted by some art historians as a vaginal image, so that she, sitting in this chair and in this sort of powerful stance, is claiming a kind of female power or empowerment there. Also quite prominent here, we see the hyena, which is an animal that appears in some other of her paintings, also in the really famous short story, the Debutante. We get the hyena and a kind of identification with hyenas. This is a female hyena, and we see the swollen, lactating breasts there. Also, I think worth noting that the mirroring of the gestures, that Carrington and the hyena are giving similar sort of gestures, mirroring each other. And we also see that hyena has rather human-like eyes and is similarly like gazing straight out of the painting, like Carrington is. Also, on the left-hand side, we get a really kind of intriguing and odd surreal detail here, where what appears to be just a sort of smearing of the canvas with turpentine, as if it were simply unfinished or something bad had happened to it. But she's painted in a shadow for this smear, making it a sort of strange but ambiguous presence there within the room. All right, here's a quotation from her from the same interview that we quoted from earlier, where Hans Ulrich Obrist asks her, do you think animals have spirit? And she responds, I think animals have everything, maybe a bit more than we have, but I believe human beings are animals. We are in the same situation as animals. Animals sometimes have faculties that we don't normally have, such as a kind of telepathy. Rupert Sheldrake, a British scientist, carried out experiments to test animal telepathy. And then she kind of talks a little bit about some of Sheldrake's experiments with dogs that know when their owners are headed home. And then she says, I've also noticed that with cats. We definitely see a lot of cats in her. I know that when she lived in Mexico, she always had cats in the house. So yeah, cats appear quite frequently in her works as well. Interesting also that here that she's linking cats, or she's linking animals to these what we kind of think of as esoteric faculties, of telepathy, but she obviously sees as just really incorporated into the natural world. The reference to Sheldrake is interesting. I think again showing her keeping up with with the sort of study and interest in various esoteric and marginal sort of subjects there. And painting brothers there with some, again, I think this is another really nice example of her use of color, which, yeah, I particularly like the works of hers that use the sort of bright, saturated colors, though that might just be my own preference. But yeah, number of animal figures that we see there. And then a much more monochromatic image. This is Animals from 1965, depicting a kind of fantastic meeting or conference of a number of different animal species. So primarily large mammals, though we do see at least one bird and also a squid there, even over on the right-hand side of the image. And besides the animals, we also see several spirit beings in attendance whose depiction, resembles the Green Man or other similar figures, so suggesting that these are nature spirits or perhaps nature deities who are also attending this meeting. The space that they're in is somewhat ambiguous, but definitely suggesting a Gothic cathedral with the columns and the, whatever you call them, those ribbed vaults that you see in Gothic architecture. Though the capitals of the columns are both vegetal and irregular, suggesting a natural or living space. So an interesting blurring between these human-made sacred spaces and the natural world, suggesting the natural world as a sacred space in its own right, and with animals not just imbued with agency and intelligence, but also the sacred presence within the non-human world that was quite important to her. Beyond simply that, I think importance for her, personally, or her understanding of the world or the nature of this planet and of divinity, a concern with ecology was also a major concern for her, especially in the latter portions of her life, where she apparently this is one of a topic that she would constantly come back to, especially in the last years of her life. Her deep concern for the damage that was being done to animals and to the natural world. I think this was a major concern for her, and we'll see this in just a few moments when we look at an essay that we'll look at some excerpts from. All right, so here we have Map of the Human Animal from 1962, which is a kind of esoteric diagram, most specifically of the human or the human animal. And we'll talk about the significance of the human animal there in just a moment. But I think also equally functioning as a cosmological diagram. This is certainly the human animal understood as microcosm, as mirror of the whole. I think this work was I don't think this was ever exhibited in her lifetime, and so I think done primarily as a personal exercise, though as we'll see, she was at least aware of the very real possibility of someone else viewing the work, so I'm not entirely clear on what her intentions were, or whether she would have considered this a finished work or merely an exercise in a diagramming out or mapping out her own sort of magical understanding of the self and of reality. All right, so we'll zoom in to different portions of the work, but just briefly to get a sense of the overall sort of setup. Obviously, we have this kind of mandala-like structure with these circles here in the very center of the image, and then the outer region is divided up into 8 sections, which are numbered. So this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we get this wheel-like sort of structure and divisions, and we'll look more at that in detail here. But first, we can look at some of this text on the lower left and right-hand side. We'll also note that as we go around, we'll have to rotate the image, and she's rotating it as she's working on it. We can see all the text here is upside down when the page is oriented in this way. All right, so here we have some of the text from the left and right-hand side. This was the highest resolution image that I could find of this, so it does get a bit pixelated when we blow it up like this, but hopefully you can still read it. So over on the left-hand side, we read the title, A Map of the Human Animal with Influences and Potentialities, and then December 15th and 16th, 1962, the 2 days it took her to produce the image. She notes here, this dance is to be conceived in spiral motion in 8 directions. So we saw that wheeling motion around the edges that in the 8 directions. And here this is a dance in a spiral dance. So something that connects the center to the periphery. not making it clear whether this is I think generally this is a spiraling inward, and we see the influences of the outer regions impinging inward in towards the center. But yeah, interesting to think of this as a dance. And because we also see, as we see here with the this reference here to the 8 interpenetrating circles are athenor when transmuted. Showing that this is also an alchemical diagram, and that we see alchemical processes of transformation going on in this image. I think which kind of resonates well with that dance metaphor, that this is an active thing that's happening here, not merely a static diagram. So yeah, this the blue circle here represents the physical body interpenetrated by the 8 worlds of psychic matter. So that's that blue circle in the center with the eight circles around it overlapping. I think worth noting that the body is put here at the center, and I think along with the fact that this is a map of the human animal, that despite all the magical, esoteric, cosmological dimensions of this image, those spiritual images and dimensions are in no way separated, both from our animal nature and our physical nature, which I think is a really nice corrective to some of the imbalances in a lot of the Hermetic tradition that sometimes wants to separate, the spirit from the body or to transcend it. And here we have all of these spiritual, magical, cosmological, cosmic dimensions present within and through the body. Also on the right-hand side here, we have a rather humorous note, and referring here obviously to the possibility of others looking at the image. And so she writes, P.S. Please note before jumping to conclusions that the word psychosis was invented as an ego saver for the puzzled psychiatrist. So, obviously some awareness of the, bizarre nature of the image, when seen by others who would not understand the project that she was engaged in. All right, and then now we can start zooming in on different pieces of the image. So yeah, here we have the center of the diagram. So again, we see this the blue circle representing the physical body in the center, interpenetrated by, what was the phrasing? The 8 worlds of psychic matter. So here we have the 8 worlds of psychic matter, and we see this division into an upper and lower, where the upper is green, and then the bottom here is gray. So we do have a separation of these worlds into a higher and lower, or above and below. So there starts to be separation and differentiation, within this image of unity. The 8 circles themselves are labeled with astrological images that are arranged in an interesting and intriguing pattern. So we have the sun and moon together at the top, and we'll talk about the significance of those together in just a moment here. And then we have, let's see, so what's the best way to look at this? So we have Mars here, and then Jupiter, and then Saturn, and then here we have the 3 modern planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So here we're starting at the sun and then moving, doing the planets further outward until we get to the outermost modern planets. But then here we have the Earth, and then here we can start from the moon if we're using more of a geocentric cosmology. We would start with the moon as the closest and the fastest, and then move outwards to Mercury, and then to Venus. But she's also included Earth here. This kind of upside down Venus glyph with the cross above the circle is an image of Earth. So she's included Earth within the diagram as well. And so we have these 2 different sort of orderings that are going on here, which is, I think quite an interesting way of setting up the diagram. And then around these 8 worlds of psychic matter, this astrological map of the solar system. Obviously, again here touching on that vision that she had of the individual as a solar system, and that way of thinking about the nature of the microcosm. Here we have these 8 worlds are the solar system, and the body is interpenetrated by these powers of the system. And then surrounding that, we have 3 sort of versions of the Ouroboros here. The alchemical snake that either just bites or holds onto its tail or swallows it in some images. That's sort of a complex thing there that we can definitely talk about in some later video on the symbolism of the Ouroboros. It's rather complicated, but a common alchemical image of the unity and the eternal, like the joining together of the beginning and the end, or of the work, the cyclical nature of the alchemical work, or the work sort of feeding on itself and transforming itself, can all be significances of this image. Sometimes also a significance of eternity and of the whole. But so we see three here. We have the red in the center here, and then this outer one is rather sort of dark or gray. Now this inner one is a rather golden kind of yellow color, but I think there's at least the suggestion of the three alchemical colors of white, black, the opposites of white and black, and then the red in the center. Though maybe just sort of colored gold to distinguish it from the background or something like that. But definitely referencing that triadic setup here. We also see them moving in contrary directions. So the red in the center is rotating in the opposite direction from the other two. So we get a kind of countercharged motion. We also see a number of animals arranged around here. So we have, again, a version of the black goose, who is here holding a rather ornate key, and is identified with Mercury again, possibly, with the Mercury glyph overlapping the goose's body. And as we already said, the goose can be associated with Hermes and with Mercury. And then with Mars here, we have what appears to be a version of Capricorn, so a goat with something of a, actually, I guess you can see the goat's back legs there. So just a goat with a long sort of curly tail there. I thought it was the kind of goat fish that we see in some versions of Capricorn, but perhaps not. But in any ways, possibly associated with Mars there. All right, and so now let's move to the outer region and look at the eight surrounding regions. All right, so we'll look at the top region first. So this is a particularly complex section here. So we have a kind of flow of arrows coming downward into the diagram and then flowing back up again. And this flow is labeled as open cosmic egg. So some sense of the connection of the individual to the cosmos and a kind of reciprocal like flowing of energy or power or spirit, down into the individual and then back out into the cosmos, perhaps. Maybe also referencing some of this alchemical imagery of processing and cycling. Then we also get this fourfold figure here that's labeled as the fourfold androgyne. We also have the note here. It says hyperbole influence of outer solar system stars. Labeled these arrows labeled there. So I think again this sort of influence of the cosmos sort of flowing down into the individual. We also have a musical clef or staff or whatever the word is there. I'm not a musician, but again referring to that idea of cosmic harmony that we already saw in some of the earlier images. Now here we have an elaboration of that image of the alchemical androgyne. So we certainly see, so we have an upper face and then three lower faces. So the left and right faces are male and female. So the red figure here is the female and the left male. And then they are joined together to this center lower figure who's what we would normally, I guess, consider to be the alchemical androgyne, though here we're also adding a fourth upper figure as if this is a kind of cosmic soul or cosmic self that perhaps when the male and female, when the opposites are united, then there's also an upper level union between the finite individual human being and then some sort of cosmic kind of dimension here. Not exactly clear, but definitely intriguing. And then we also see these two intertwining currents here, which I think we could possibly interpret these as related to the caduceus of Hermes, with the two serpents that wind up the messenger's staff that Hermes or Mercury carries. Though I think it's probably more likely to be a reference to tantric or yogic practice and philosophy, where you have the Ida and the Pingala, the solar and lunar currents that wind their way up along the spine in tantric and yogic practice, which are related to the raising of the Kundalini energy, and those two currents that have to be balanced and united for spiritual transformation. And definitely related to the unification of opposites, and that could be understood as a kind of internal alchemy and a transformation of the self through the engagement with these cyclic and opposite currents that are circulated and united together there within the self in spiritual practice. And so I think we can now see why this figure is connected to the circle that concludes both the sun and the moon. As the alchemical androgyne unifying the solar and lunar opposites there. All right, and then we'll jump over to the right and look at the second section. So we see this numbered 2 and the line here connecting to the sphere with Mars and to this goat horned figure here. And we read, hoofed animals, Cernunnos, horned god, rocks, minerals, bloodstream. So pretty natural associations with Mars. Cernunnos is a Celtic deity who plays a big role in 20th century Wicca and witchcraft traditions. He's a horned male deity, often taken as the consort of the goddess. Associated with the wilds and male energy, so natural association with Mars, as is hoofed animals generally, and the blood as well as a classic association with Mars. And she's also adding rocks and minerals, so we're getting not just we're getting divine figures, elements of the world, rocks and minerals, as well as elements of the the individual body, so the bloodstream here. All right, and then we see number 3, our third section here, which connects over to the sphere of Jupiter. We also have connected to this here, we see the glyph of the alchemical sulfur. We also have this cobra and a sword here. And let's see, we read here, Excalibur, suffering endured, understanding. So the Excalibur obviously is the magical sword, from Arthurian legend, connecting it to suffering endured and understanding, which she may also be, connecting to some of the symbolism and associations with the alchemical sulfur. The combination of the sword and the serpent is something we see in a lot of alchemical images, where typically though the serpent would be pierced by the sword, which is typically a reference to the process of the fixation of the volatile. So the serpent, as an image of the volatile, is fixed or pinned into place by the sword. But yeah, here the serpent is simply twined around the sword, and the sword is interpreted as the magical sword of Arthur, which is an interesting development of that image. We also see close to the Jupiter here, we see consciousness as a weapon of redemption and the hollows, which I'm not quite sure what the reference to the hollows is there, but consciousness as a weapon of redemption, I think certainly makes sense as an association with Jupiter. Also, we see a note here pointing towards the 8 circles, the 8 worlds of psychic matter, or we see them labeled as the inner 4-dimensional space. So that reference to 4-dimensional space is definitely connected to the tradition associated with Uspensky and some other kind of spiritual interest in 4th-dimensional space that we've mentioned a few times already in the course of this channel, and we will definitely come back to in the future, but not right now. All right, and then we will flip the page on its side here for section number 4, which is the sphere of Saturn here. And we read lead and bones, skeleton, and then I think that says the mass. I find it slightly difficult to read, but lead, the metal of Saturn, the bones and skeleton, traditional associations with Saturn, and mass as well. Sort of makes a lot of sense for a correspondence with Saturn. That one's quite straightforward. But again, elaborating both the parts of the world and the cosmos, even the mass as something. As a rather abstract sort of concept or element there, being linked to Saturn and the process of embodiment. Both the metal, lead, and the body. So again, these sort of multiple interpenetrating levels that we see throughout the diagram. That is, really so characteristic of the esoteric tradition of the correspondences between the different levels of reality. All right, so now we'll look at section number 5, and we've flipped our image upside down, so we're at the very bottom of the diagram and exactly opposite to the fourfold androgyne in that sense of cosmic consciousness that we had up there at the top. Here we're in a much darker sort of realm. This is also a particularly complex and section of the diagram, and definitely everything that's going on here is not exactly clear. So we have a five-fold, five-headed figure here. The central figure or central head here has only a single eye. Then there appears to be an old man on one side and what may be a younger woman on the other. So some of the opposites of human life, male and female, young and old. And then on either side of them, we have seemingly a wolf-headed figure, and then a bird head here, each of which has 3 eyes, possibly for 7. If these two figures have closed eyes or no eyes there, possibly 7 eyes total, which is a magically significant number, but not exactly clear what's going on. They're riding on a leopard who is also blind. We see there the blind leopard and inverted scream. This figure or this realm of the image is labeled unconscious and sleep. We also see references to this idea that this form that they're in, which mirrors that the open cosmic egg. Now we have another sort of, this is the womb where reconciliation is conceived. And we also read of it as corruption, to initiate gestation in Athenor. And we read chaos and differentiation, change of primary form. So some alchemical images here, both of the breaking down of form, the conception of reconciliation and gestation. So the bottom part of the cycle, and also the planting of seeds, which perhaps if we take the fourfold androgyne to be the final result of the alchemical process that we're witnessing here, perhaps this is the place at the bottom where the process is begun, or or at least a new stage of it is begun that will eventually blossom into that cosmic consciousness and the full reconciliation of opposites that we got there at the top with the fourfold androgyne. But definitely a particularly complicated and enigmatic area of the diagram. We also have the 5 is connected to this circle here, where we see the 3 modern planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. We also see a flame here underneath the figure, so referring to the fire, that is heating the alchemical vessel, that is the catalyst that produces the transformation and the breakdown and transformation of matter inside of the vessel here. I also read this fire burns underwater, the water perhaps referring to Neptune. Neptune can certainly also refer to kind of underworld, as Pluto also, to underworld type images. Though it's interesting to have those images connected to the outer and most distant planets. All right, and then we'll move on and look at number 6 here. So let's see. So the number 6 is pointing at, it looks like the glyph of Venus because the page is upside down, but this is the Earth glyph. So we're connected to the Earth here, and we see this star labeled static pole star. So this is Polaris, though we also see this connection here between 6 and the leopard figure there, which I'm not quite sure what that's indicating. The static pole star or Polaris being connected to the Earth, maybe refers to the geocentric perspective. That Polaris seems to be immobile, just as we, on the Earth, don't feel ourselves moving. Let's see. We also read here projected consciousness as demonic disintegration and possession by conceptual thought, rage. Now, this text may be more connected to the section number 5, though it is quite close to the image of the pole star there. So I'm not quite sure what's happening or what the reference to rage or the demonic disintegration seems to fit more with the section number 5 that we just talked about. But yeah, I'm not entirely clear what's happening there either. All right, now we're right side up, and we're in section number 7 here. This is connected to the planet Venus. We've got a bunch of stuff going on here, but unlike the previous 2 sections, we can actually make some sense of it, I think. Let's see, so we also see Ceres, which is the name of an asteroid, and we see the glyph of that asteroid as used in modern astrology. Ceres, of course, is the Roman goddess equivalent to the Greek Demeter, goddess of the earth. And so we see the plant kingdom here, which obviously is associated with Ceres, but also is very much connected to Venus. And so here we have getting back into these kind of cosmological or mapping here, as we saw with minerals and lead and bones and blood on the other side of the diagram. So here we have the plant kingdom. Let's see. So yeah, associated with Venus and with Ceres. It's suggesting also the Ceres as the complement of the sulfur, that we saw on the right-hand side in section number 3, which is, that would be another interesting line of speculation that we could go down. Let's see. Underneath, we read lions and bees, and we see a lion here and a group of bees. And we also read reconciliation of opposites and awakening. We also read here gold and copper and roaring mantra. All right, so let's see. So copper, we can make a series of associations and link together some of these correspondences here and maybe tease out some of what's happening. So copper is the sacred metal of Venus, where gold is the metal of the sun. Now lions are also very closely connected to the sun, so that suggests that the pairing of lions and bees is equivalent to gold and copper, which would be sun and Venus. Now, association of bees with Venus is definitely an association I've seen before. The most bees are female, the central place of the queen. Those are all, I think, important reasons to associate with the planet, most closely linked to women and femininity. Interestingly, bees can also have honey specifically can have a solar association, both because of its color and because it doesn't decay, and things submerged. This was used in the ancient world. Things submerged in honey, don't spoil. So that sense of preserving and sort of stabilizing that can be connected to the sun. So even the bees themselves have both maybe a Venusian and a solar sort of aspect. But yeah, the lions and bees together. We're getting this idea of the reconciliation of opposites. We can see them as male and female figures here. Venus is closely linked to the moon and shares a lot of qualities in common with the moon. So it's not too much of a stretch to think of the sun and Venus as related or similar to the pairing of sun and moon and those opposites. Also suggested there by the reconciliation of opposites. Lions and bees are also connected together by the biblical story of Samson and the riddle that he tells, where he had seen bees making a nest in the corpse, in the rotting corpse of a lion. This is interesting. This is a story that we also referenced in the video on the musical group Coil back towards the beginning of this culture series. So interesting to see that coming up again. I think that's also something that's maybe more prominent in British culture because there's that brand of honey, the British brand of honey that references this story on the front of it. So it's, I think, even closely associated with that story is very closely associated with honey for those coming out of British culture. Let's just keep moving on here. All right, and then we get now we're at the final section before I think in some sense the fourfold androgyne could be seen as the final product of this whole process. But yeah, this is section number 8, which we read birds, metal, and rain. And integration of volatile matter connected to Mercury. And again, we see this goose here that we can connect and understand as the bird sacred to Mercury. Interesting set of associations there, birds, metal, and rain, and the integration of volatile matter. So that's a little tour around that diagram. There's still mysteries there and things I don't fully understand what she's doing, but I think it's a really nice map of her this inner landscape, at least at this particular moment in time, and a lot of really compelling material and connections to a lot of her other works here. So hope that's been worth the time to take a look at. All right, so that concludes the material that I recorded a week ago, and now we can move along and look at our next topic here, which will be feminism. So just for the purposes of organizing the video and focusing the discussion, it made sense to separate apart her ecological and environmental concerns from those of feminism. But I think it's also important to highlight that these things are really interwoven for her to the point that it probably would, in some sense, would make more sense to talk about ecofeminism in Carrington's works and really see these things as united. Now, that term ecofeminism can definitely mean slightly different things in different contexts, but at least the way I've seen it used, especially when talking about movements from the 1970s, kind of through the 1990s, there's often a connotation of a connection between the conception of nature and the human relationship to nature with mysticism, and especially with the goddess movement and various forms of neo-paganism. Maybe most prominently Wicca, but certainly not limited to Wicca. Various forms of neo-paganism that focus on the figure of the goddess or on the divine feminine. And I think Carrington is certainly no exception to that. Her ecofeminist interests and concerns are certainly very deeply interwoven with her interest in the writings of people like Robert Graves or Gerald Gardner that we talked about in part 1. Although that kind of interest in witchcraft and the representation of women in various forms of esotericism and the feminine and alchemy, all that very closely connected to this topic here, as well as to the topic of ecology. So the image that you are seeing on your screen here is a poster design that Carrington did for a group, and I apologize for my terrible Spanish pronunciation here, but a group called Mujeres Conciencia, which now in works on Carrington, I've typically seen that name translated as Women's Awareness. And maybe there's a nuance of the Spanish that's simply lost on me. That's definitely possible. And that is the best translation, but we can certainly see in the word conciencia that it comes from the same Latin root that gives us the English word consciousness, and that's what this group was. This was a feminist consciousness-raising group. And in fact, this was the first such group, at least as scholars seem to be aware, in all of Mexico. And it met in Carrington's home, which I think is a pretty remarkable fact that the first feminist consciousness-raising group in the country met in her home. So I'm sure some people watching this video will already be familiar with that, the concept of feminist consciousness-raising groups. But for those who aren't, they were particularly prominent in the 1970s, though some certainly continued on beyond that. Now, there was no absolute sort of blueprint or model for how these groups should go, and my impression is that they evolved in different directions. Some were maybe more like reading groups where they were reading various feminist texts and having discussions on them. Some were maybe a little more like activist groups, some interwoven with other political or social concerns. But in what I understand as the sort of typical setup was that it was focused on discussion of where women would talk about issues from their own personal lives, and then they would help each other understand how those issues and concerns and struggles were related to broader, related to feminist concepts and to broader social and systemic issues. So, a woman talking about whatever the way that her husband treats her, or her relationship with her, the way that her parents treated her differently than they treated her brothers growing up, or whatever else, and then relating that to concepts of patriarchy and the oppression of women and women's roles in society and things like that. So raising consciousness from a sense that this is simply a personal individual issue to that broader sense of it being a political and systemic social issue. So in the image that she's created here, we see her using a number of motifs that will already be familiar to us. So the overlapping circles, the black and white figures and the interchange of black and white, the interchange and balancing of those opposites, the egg-like form there in the center, the appearance of a magical animal here. Also the serpent's tail, we can see spiraling inwards towards the bottom of the painting there, towards this tree that is growing in the form of an equal-armed cross, which I think we can probably interpret the equal-armed cross as a reference to either to the four elements of fire, air, water, and earth, or to the four directions of north, south, east, and west. And in either case, towards the balancing and fullness of the natural world and of the earth and its spiritual dimension, and that motion inwards towards the center where the various realms or the various opposites or contraries all converge, much as we also saw in the map of the human animal there. I think we see that same idea repeated here. But the overall scene that we're seeing here is obviously being drawn from the book of Genesis, and the scene in which the serpent tempts Eve into eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. But, and I'm sure this will not be at all surprising by this point, Carrington is taking this scene and really modifying it, or not just modifying it, but really turning it back against itself and its standard meaning and its standard interpretation to produce something that is, not just new, but is really quite subversive and heretical here. So this is absolutely not a scene of a fall, not the scene of sin, and certainly not a scene where we see, women being sort of demonized or blamed. The serpent itself is not in any way portrayed as satanic or sinister, but as a kind of wise, magical initiator here. And yeah, it's a scene of initiation and of, I think, perhaps we could say in this context specifically, a scene of raised consciousness, that eating from the tree here, is an image of expanded awareness and growing knowledge and awareness. I think it's also really important to notice that this is not just the serpent offering the fruit to Eve, but we actually see two women exchanging fruit with each other. So the two women, I think, are engaging in assisting each other and helping each other to develop that raised consciousness, which is exactly what feminist consciousness raising groups were aimed to do. So yeah, I think it's just a really beautiful and powerful image here, and one that's obviously done with such an awareness of the way that story and all the various cultural and social dimensions and repercussions of that story, the way that that image of the sinful woman responsible for the fall of humanity has been used to justify patriarchy and women's oppression and all the rest. I just think it's a really, really striking and beautiful image. All right, so here we have just one example of feminist themes in Carrington's paintings. Certainly there's many, many others that we could look at, but just one here. So we see several female figures here in a somewhat enigmatic scene. The title also is suggestive but enigmatic, The Magdalens. So obviously referring to the figure of Mary Magdalene, from the New Testament, but at the same time, it's not clear what it means in the plural. Has Magdalene become a title? Are these her descendants? Is this some sort of community that was, that she founded or was founded in her honor? It's really not clear exactly what the relationship between these women and Mary Magdalene is, but nevertheless is suggestive and frames interpretation and suggests a number of possible readings. Let's see, we obviously see some familiar motifs here of the black and the white. We also see the woman in black is holding a small red circle in the palm of her hand, and the woman with the long white hair is holding a white circle. So again, we see these alchemical colors of black, white, and red, and all the possible meanings that we've already discussed there. Also, I'm not sure if we already touched on that, but white and red can also be opposites in alchemy, where they can be solar and lunar, or sulfur and mercury in alchemical terms. So possibly have a couple of different interchanges of opposites going on here. Now, there's a story, I forget exactly where I heard it now, but I heard a story anyways of Carrington being asked about this painting and asked, what these small little red and white objects that the two women appear to be exchanging here, what they are. And Carrington, who, as we've said, was often quite resistant to giving any sort of interpretation of her painting, responded in a way that sounded rather sort of flippant, maybe even sarcastically, that they were birth control pills, which I think this is actually quite typical of Carrington, that although that seems to be her almost kind of giving a slightly silly answer, or maybe even refusing to answer the question, but if you think about it for a moment, I think that's actually quite a plausible and significant answer. These women exchanging things perhaps in a sacred or magical sort of context, and exchanging objects that allow them to control and have control of their own reproduction, I think really is genuinely a powerful, magical and even sacred act. Birth control, I think, for Carrington was also important, not just for women's control of their own reproduction, and that being an important element of women's rights, but also for population control. As we'll see in just a few minutes here, Carrington was concerned that overpopulation was contributing to ecological crisis, and so women's ability to control the population was certainly important to her. All right, so now I want to take a look at an important essay of Carrington's. It's not an extremely long essay, but we can look at, a third or maybe even closer to a half of it here and talk through it. Because, I think it's an important essay and also one that really touches on a number of the concerns that we've already talked about and things quite important to her ideas, and is just generally a significant piece of writing. So this essay, I think, is usually referred to as What is a Woman? Originally, it was published under the title The Emancipation of Women. It was originally published in, I believe it was 1970, in a journal called Cultural Correspondence that the Chicago Surrealists, who we've mentioned before, were involved in and edited at least some of the issues of that journal. I'm not exactly clear on the relationships there. But in any case, in one of the issues of Cultural Correspondence, they published this essay. It's been republished in a number of Surrealist readers. If any of you watched the video I did on Surrealism, a couple of the books that I suggested towards the end there, the Surrealist Women, edited by Penelope Rosemont, includes this essay, and with the Surrealist Reader, edited by Michael Richardson and Dawn Ades, that I believe includes this essay there as well, and I'm sure you can find it online without too much difficulty. Occasionally, I've also seen the essay referred to as Female Human Animal, though I don't know it was ever actually published under that title. But in any case, just be aware that all three of those things are the same essay. All right, so the essay starts off, 53 years ago, I was born a female human animal. This, I was told, meant I was a woman. but I never knew what they meant. So from here, Carrington goes on to investigate not just gender and gender identity, but even really identity, the whole concept of identity as a whole, which I think is a significant theme in her work, and one we can continue to talk about. All right, so skipping just a few paragraphs down, so she's begun to investigate and interrogate the question of identity. So she says, "If I am my thoughts, then I could be anything from chicken soup to a pair of scissors, a crocodile, a corpse, a leopard, or a pint of beer. If I am my feelings, then I am love, hate, irritation, boredom, happiness, pride, humility, pain, pleasure, and so on and so forth. If I am my body, then I am a fetus to a middle-aged woman, changing every second. Yet, like everybody else, I yearn for an identity, although this yearning mystifies me always. If there is a true individual identity, I would like to find it, because like truth on discovery, it has already gone. So I try to reduce myself to facts. I am an aging human female now. Soon I will be old and then dead. This is all I know as far as facts are concerned. These facts are not particularly edifying or original. However, out of the depths of this humanoid female, a nameless apprehension is constantly present, of a no I, no me, no it, but is, limitlessly mysterious, but there, no doubt at all, pre-form, pre-light, pre-darkness, pre-sound, is. Then, in idle rumination, I find pleasure in imagining that I am some kind of seed that must split and germinate into something so unlike what I appear to be that I could not imagine in my wildest moments, but intensely convinced that once the split is complete, the absolute other will take over in this field of doubting multitude I call myself and take a step further in evolution. Perhaps I am talking of death, or of those who are not yet born, those we call women, perhaps men." So I think this is such a wonderful example of Carrington's sensibility and her really extraordinary ability to, with such, not a large number of words and in such simple, straightforward way, to move across and between such seemingly disparate registers, from the sort of absurd and the silly. If I could be a chicken soup to a pair of scissors or a crocodile, and then moving on to I think a very genuine but very simple and very personal exploration of identifying with feelings, identifying with the body, looking at the psychological yearning for a stable, definite identity, even at the same time that she is skeptical or suspicious of that yearning and skeptical about whether that can actually exist, or if it could exist, whether it could be found. And then, from there, moving, sort of penetrating even deeper, beyond the identity, beyond this, humanoid female. Again, we see, I think, some of that idea of the human animal here. Really understanding herself, as an organism and as a body, as a part of nature, and something that is engaged, in the process of aging, that is mortal and perishable. I think we certainly can see a deep resonance with Buddhism here. I'm not sure exactly, how much Buddhist study she would have done at the time that she wrote this already, but I think certainly very, very resonant and compatible with Buddhist conceptions of identity and the interrogation of identity, and the releasing of that attachment to it. And then finding, beneath all of these particular things, all the facts, that she reduces herself to there, finding behind that all a kind of mystical sense of an is, some sort of being that is prior to any particular identity. And then from there, transitioning into seeing the self as a process and as potential, as a seed that needs to be split open so that it can germinate. Seeing the self as always having unrealized and untapped possibilities. That in that mystery of the self, there's always the possibility of something, of the self, in a sense, like giving birth to another being that would transcend the individual there. So. Yeah, I think quite a lot there and very powerfully expressed. And I think it's also just really worth taking a moment to appreciate that this very playful, philosophical, even mystical interrogation and critique and even overturning of the very notion of a stable, coherent, persisting individual identity, that this is happening in the context of an essay that was originally, at least, entitled The Emancipation of Women. And I think we see some of that same dynamic, or even almost seeming like contradiction or paradox, perhaps, in Carrington's own life, that at the same time that feminism and the feminist struggle is so important to Carrington, both personally, we can think of her role in organizing and hosting that feminist consciousness-raising group, as well as in her work and her visual art and in her writing. That at the same time she was so resistant to and really disliked being referred to as or understood as a woman artist, and never wanted her work to be seen through that sort of identitarian lens. And I think that the impression that I get anyways is of and this is certainly not unique to Carrington, but I think Carrington has a very powerful articulation of how under patriarchy, it's not that one identity group oppresses another, but rather that oppression of the patriarchal system is the production and maintenance of an identity for the identity woman that restricts and oppresses and controls. That limiting identity is a product of that system of oppression. You see the same idea in some, for example, in some articulations of anti-racist struggle, that it's not that humanity is first sort of grouped into different racial groups, and then some of those groups or one of those groups then establishes a kind of dominance or oppressive relationship to another, but that rather the concept of race and the categorization of humans into race is itself a product of racism and a system of unequal power, racist power relations. So I think we see this really powerfully, in Carrington, in that sense that the part of the feminist struggle includes the pushing against any kind of limitation or confinement of the individual or of a more collective sense to a particular group. I think we also see this very much in Carrington's works, and including some of the works that we've already seen here, that as much as we see images of powerful or magical women, or images that kind of strike at certain images of male power or dominance, we also see images of androgynous beings and beings that are beyond beyond those individual identities. That I think androgynous beings are probably just as common, perhaps even more common, especially at certain stages of Carrington's work, as images of magical or empowered women. And I think in just a few minutes, when we briefly look at the novella *The Stone Door*, we can return to that idea there and see how it plays out in one of her literary works. All right, and then we can just move along and get back into the essay here. So here she's continuing to develop this image of the seed and the potentialities of the seed to produce something new. So she writes, "But will they give the chance to this seed to split and germinate? On what does future organic life on this earth depend? What induced the serpent to grow feathers? A nameless force operating in the unknown psyche or preform of life that can perhaps perform miracles, if miracles are allowed." So we'll see these ideas continuing to develop as we move along here, but just a couple brief comments. I think it's important that her sense of the future organic life on Earth is a radical, not just the maintenance or continuation of life, but also a radical openness to something new emerging, and that life as we understand it, and I mean certainly human society and even the sort of the human organism and the human psyche are not any kind of final or ultimate form, but are still in process and still contain all sorts of unrealized potentialities, and that I think this is I maybe don't really want to get into it here, but some concepts of what's sometimes referred to as reproductive futurity, the sense of the future as the simple reproduction of human life that we see in a lot of I know a lot of the kind of tech bros and their sense of why we need to colonize Mars, or whatever else. These things are always from a very, very limited perspective of the maintenance and reproduction of humans and human society and human identity as it currently exists. And I think Carrington's sense of the future here is something far more radical and opposed to that sense. This reference to what induced the serpent to grow feathers, I think is really interesting. The image of a winged serpent, which she's at least primarily drawing from Mexican tradition, the deity Quetzalcoatl is certainly very important to her, and we'll see that again. But I think we can also understand this as an evolutionary image, the evolution of the birds evolving out of reptiles here. But again, as an image of the production of something new that feathers or birds and flight emerged as this kind of radically new development in the history of organic life on Earth. And again, this articulation about a nameless force operating in the unknown psyche, really recalling what she finds in herself when she analyzes that which is below or beyond any notion of an individual identity. And I think that's quite powerful too. That thing that she finds that is no longer an individual person, certainly no longer a woman or Leonora Carrington or even human any longer. That deep thing is also here found in a kind of force that gives rise to evolution and lies at the heart of the evolving life on Earth. All right, jumping forward a bit in the essay again here, we read, "Since civilization is rolling quickly toward absolute destruction for Earth, blind, inane mass suicide for all living beings, the last hope is an active will to step out of the mechanical trap and refuse. This will could produce a medium for evolution. If all the women of the world decide to control the population, to refuse war, to refuse discrimination of sex or race, and thus force men to allow life to survive on this planet, that would be a miracle indeed." So again, this radical sense that although the situation is quite dire, there is always the possibility for something new. To me, I guess this recalls some of that when we in the surrealism video that looked at that essay of Suzanne Césaire's, and she uses that image of the tightrope of our hope. I get some of that same sense for Carrington, that although she's really aware of how bleak and how dire and how serious the situation is, both socially and ecologically, and I think this is even more true now than when Carrington wrote it. But there is always that possibility for what Carrington's referring to as a miracle, not understood as a kind of divine intervention, but that we, through our own action, our own vision, our own understanding, have the ability to produce or give rise to something new. All right, continuing on here, here getting into the very conclusion of the essay, she writes, "However corrupt our emotional system has become, there is nevertheless a nucleus in all beings which knows basically that which is true and that which is false. Psychoanalysis, which is still fumbling in the unknown, has shown us that we can find a great deal of self-knowledge through our dreams, even if this science is in an embryonic state. Lies we live are shown to us in dreams. There appears to be a knower in the unconscious that is never fooled and can rise to the conscious mind if the emotions are prepared to accept some elements of truth. The idea that our masters are right and must be loved, honored, and obeyed is, I think, one of the most destructive lies that has ever been instilled into the female psyche. It has become most horribly obvious what these masters have done to our planet and her organic life. If women remain passive, I think there is very little hope for the survival of life on this earth. So I think here we get, I think that all really speaks for itself, but I think here we get a really, potent articulation of ecofeminism in the sense both of, the fact that the destruction of the non-human world and of ecosystems is related to, to the patriarchal oppression of women, but that also that, or even because of this, there is that women themselves have a potential and a power to radically transform that system that is increasingly threatening the survival of all life on Earth. All right, so here we have The House Opposite from 1945, an important painting in Carrington's oeuvre, and also an important, fairly early painting. The mid-40s are right about the time when Carrington's really, mature and most powerful style is just emerging. So yeah, I think this is an important, relatively early work for her. Now we're going to focus in on just one particular scene within this overall composition, but in reference to our discussion of feminism here. But I think it's also just worth appreciating the compositional strategy that's happening here. Certainly drawing on some like sort of early Renaissance or even late medieval sort of compositional strategies, but adapting them into this modern and surrealist sort of register here. And so we see, there's no single focus, there's no main character, no single focal point, but we rather have a variety of different scenes. But they're also not separate. So we see characters, passing from one room into another, even boundaries. We have, of course, doorways and staircases and ladders, that lead from one area or one room into another. But we also see characters, passing through a floor or emerging out of a ceiling. And we can see different, or passing from one room to another, so that at the same time that we have these separate individual scenes going on, they also interweave and connect to each other. And suggest that we can view different aspects of the scenes and think about how they resonate or relate to each other, and how different themes and images in one part of the painting may sort of interact symbolically with those in another. And I think that this will be an important, when we look in a few minutes at the novella The Stone Door, I think approaching that work in as organized in a similar sort of way, that there's not a single coherent main character, but that we rather have a variety of different scenes, sometimes often layered within each other, but that we can also trace the transformation and motion of particular images or concepts or even objects from one area of the narrative to another. And I just think it's worth appreciating that style. We can see both that organizational strategy, both in her literary works and in many of her visual productions as well. So zooming in on the lower right-hand corner of the picture here, we see a scene that is often repeated in Carrington's works, and or variations or similar resonant images repeated in a lot of her works. So we see a group of three women here gathered around some sort of cauldron or container full of a bubbling liquid. So it's not clear to us whether these women are, witches gathering around a cauldron, perhaps brewing some sort of magical potion. They could be engaged in a sort of alchemical activity, or they could be merely preparing a soup. They could be cooks preparing a meal. And I think it's not that there is ambiguity between those interpretations, but that rather they overlap with each other, and that here the very ordinary domestic labor or reproductive labor, of preparing food and nourishment for a household is directly identified with these, transformative alchemical and magical activities. And we know that this is how Carrington approached, her own cooking. And her own interest in cooking, and her own, very kind of wild, often experimental approach to cuisine, and her interest in, combining unlikely ingredients together, or even making dishes using ingredients that have specific, magical resonances or correspondences or significance. And so, I think transforming that domestic labor into a genuinely magical act is an important element in Carrington's feminism. All right, and then last image we'll look at before we move on to the stone door is a very famous and very celebrated, justly so, very celebrated painting of Carrington's. This is Grandmother Moorhead's Aromatic Kitchen. So Moorhead was Carrington's mother's maiden name. So Grandmother Moorhead is Carrington's maternal grandmother, and that's the Irish side as well, which I think Carrington always had a real identification with the Celtic mythology and the really magical dimensions of the Irish folklore and those roots of those pagan traditions, and the way that especially that interacts with her study of witchcraft and a book like Robert Graves's The White Goddess. So in that register, we can definitely see the large white goose here as an image of the White Goddess. Let's see. We also see, we see, again, what appears to be a fairly ordinary domestic scene. We see a large kind of Mexican-style stove in the background there. We see the table with the three figures gathered around the table, covered in vegetables. But we also see that this table is kind of positioned as a sort of altar within a magic circle. And the various beings here that we see, who are rather ambiguous beings, are these. It would be easy, I think, to assume that they're all women, but they're here portrayed very, as androgynous, mysterious, enigmatic beings, and I think that's certainly important. But transforming this scene, into a very magical ritual. Over on the right-hand side, we see a goat-headed figure carrying a broom, so obviously referring to the witch's Sabbath there. And then you're probably not going to be able to see it in this reproduction, but there's another sort of mysterious figure standing outside in the darkness outside of the door. So there's also, I think, some sense of these outside or alien or unknown forces having some, entryway or place within this domestic scene, which I think is a very powerful thing on its own. And I think that the garlic, the fact that the bulbs of garlic there are spaced around the magic circle, but then we also see them on the table, or I think the figure in blue there appears to be holding garlic. So we even have the same herb that is used to flavor cooking, but is also has a magical significance. There is also important. But just a really beautiful painting, and I think another really a really striking version of Carrington's impressive of use of color, and the really bright saturated color here I think is really striking and wonderful. All right, and then just to finish us off in this part 2 here, we will look at take a very brief and very, very partial look at the novella The Stone Door. So despite being relatively brief, just a little over 100 pages, The Stone Door is basically impossible to summarize. There is no single coherent narrative, and although there's constant echoes and the reappearance of particular characters and objects and images and symbols from one section of the novella to the others, they never resolve into anything like a coherent or linear story. So I think that the back of in the recent republication of this by the NYRB, the New York Review of Books, who have been doing republications of Carrington's works over the last few years, which, interestingly, I just found out that since I recorded the beginning of this video, I found out that they're actually going to be publishing in 2026 some of her plays and dramatic works, which will include the Penelope that we looked at the set and costume designs for. So, so I'll finally get a chance to find out what happens in that play. But in any case, on the back cover of this new publication, it refers to the novel as a puzzle box. But I think that's really not quite the right image. I think the image of a puzzle box is something complex and puzzling, but that can be resolved. That there is a kind of solution that would snap all the apparent sort of discontinuities and enigmas into something consistent and linearly comprehensible, but that's really not the case here. And I think if we want to if we want to interpret and make any kind of sense of the stone door, we have to read in a very different way than we ordinarily read a narrative. Much like I think surrealist works of art call on us to view art differently and with a different kind of attention and a very different mode of interpretation. So in reading the stone door, we need to be attentive to the reappearance of particular images, especially doubles and pairs and various forms of doubling, and yeah, just any recurrence of images or concepts or even names that echo things that have happened previously. And so following out these different chains and threads of connection and the way that these images and to a certain extent characters recur and interact with each other, and how they build up and transform and change their meanings and their relationships throughout the course of the novella. Because it is so short, the language of it, despite the, I think, real difficulty of interpretation or comprehension, the language is quite straightforward and comprehensible. And because it's short, I think it makes it quite easy to reread. So that would definitely be my suggestion, would be to read and then reread. That new publication from the NYRB, there's a pretty useful afterword by a woman named Anna Watts that I think is quite useful as well. So the painting you see here on the screen is Cheeky Tompe. Tompe means your country, so this is Cheeky, your country. Painting she did in 1944, so done right about the same time that she's writing the novella The Stone Door. So the Cheeky here is her second husband, Cheeky Weiss. This would be right around the same time that they met and were married. And they remained married until Cheeky's death in the early 2000s. So not entirely unlike Carrington, Cheeky ended up in Mexico City after escaping from Europe and escaping from the Nazis. So Cheeky was a Jewish man born in Hungary, and then he kind of ended up fleeing across Europe and eventually managing to get out, fleeing from the Nazis, and eventually managed to get out of Europe and make it to Mexico City. And so we'll see throughout the novella The Stone Door, a lot of the male and female characters will echo elements of Carrington and Cheeky's biographies, and as we'll see, not just their biographies, but also their astrological birth charts. So yeah, I mean, paying attention, there's a number of Jewish characters throughout the book, and a Hungarian Jewish sort of boy who has a kind of, or is seeking out an unnamed woman who appears throughout the narrative. They appear in each other's dreams from the time of their childhood and are obviously destined to be together. And as we'll pull out a little bit, their destined relationship and love has quite significant cosmic and really social and kind of political implications. So she's, in a sense, we could say that she's taking the story of their love and reading into it all this esoteric and really kind of world-shaping significance. In this painting, we not only see the two of them in the upper right corner kind of joined together inside of this large red-robed figure, but we also see a number of elements and images and symbols that occur throughout the stone door. So it's nice to, I think, kind of study this painting alongside the novella. And we'll look at a few of the images, though not all of them, as we go along here. For example, one we won't look at is down in the bottom left-hand corner. We can see a boat there that appears in the novella that is made out of the skin and bones of a goat. But yeah, we'll look at a few others. So along the lines of not seeing or understanding the novella as a puzzle box, as something to be solved, I think it's also important not to lose sight of I guess we could say the texture of the work, the individual language, and just the streams of symbols, which don't all, or even most of the symbols and images that we're encountering throughout the text don't relate to the overall kind of structure and order and this underlying nonlinear structure of images and characters and concepts and in their constantly shifting relationships and transformations, but it's important not to see the novel as something to be decoded and understood. That important not to just lose sight of the actual text itself and the flows of images that we get, on the appreciating both the surface and the depth and the way that those things kind of exchange or change places in a variety of ways here is important. Especially when we start interpreting the esoteric symbolism there. Understanding some of those references is certainly important and really helps us understand what's going on and what's happening in the story. But even there, we shouldn't reduce the actual images or the language that we're seeing to a mere kind of encoding of an esoteric structure or set of symbols. But we need to see both simultaneously. All right, so as I said, we will take a very, very abbreviated and very partial look at just a few of the underlying structures and sort of continuing themes throughout the story. And in particular, I want to highlight things that intersect with images and ideas that we've already been talking about here, and just look at how some of the themes we've been concerned with play out over the course of this novella, but definitely very, very partial and incomplete reading here. For time, if for nothing else, I think it would take quite a long video to go in depth. I mean, the novella is almost impossible to summarize, as I've said. So here we're in chapter 1, and here we're setting the scene here. When it rained, humidity pressed around the house and clung to the walls till a crop of fungi, varying from green to orange, speckled sepia to purple, covered the walls, giving a colored hide like that of a dragon. Even the prancing centaur on top of the observatory had a pelt of wild mushrooms. This made him look as if he was made of felt, not stone. The 3 men who sat silently in the observatory under the centaur were watching the moon, which was well on the wane. They were dressed in clean white linen and sat at equal distances around a table. Each man had a telescope, a microscope, and a flower, which they examined meticulously, now and again jotting down a figure in chalk on the black table. So here we have a description that sounds very much like a description of one of her paintings. We see familiar images, the telescope and the microscope that we encountered in down below. The centaur, especially this centaur sort of covered in multicolored mushrooms, giving an appearance of felt rather than stone, I think is a very Carrington-esque image here. The 3 men dressed in white linen, seated around a table, again, sounds exactly like something we might see in one of her paintings. Now, the 3 men here who really only appear in chapter 1, there's some repetitions of some of these figures, or figures that appear in some of the later chapters could certainly be related back to these figures. They're not in any sort of direct sense. So this is a chapter that's really, in a lot of ways, fairly isolated, though ideas from it will reoccur and be important. So these 3 men here, they are identified as the European, the Jew, and the Chinaman, which is obviously not a word that we use any longer, but it was the 1940s. So these 3 figures represent, I think, or one way that we could interpret them certainly is as a kind of representatives of a patriarchal order, and by being representations of different ethnicities from different parts of the world, representing a kind of global, like patriarchal, almost like secretive order controlling the world here. Though, as we will see, the figure, the man here, the Jew, he dissents from the others, which will resonate with other Jewish figures that we will see later in the story. And the character Zacharias, who is the main character in the 4th and 5th sections, and is the character sort of destined to be with the unnamed woman. He is Jewish as well. So I think some of that, seeing within Judaism a certain kind of potential, I think is one of for pushing back against the dominant structures, is an interesting element or kind of subtext within the novella. All right, skipping ahead a little bit in chapter 1, we read they're having a conversation with each other. Drink your milk, the European told the Jew angrily. Perhaps it can still mend. No, I am running dry. I must have a woman. They saw him clearly for the first time and were horrified at the sight. He continued to caress the palm of his left hand. If we ignore the door of the womb, we shall shrivel and die. The danger of sharing such a secret, said the Chinaman eventually, would loosen all the damning powers in the universe. No woman must ever learn more than the circle around her hearth. The Jew did not appear to be listening. Sweet chaos, he murmured to himself, and out of that chaos, a new chaotic order, never before dreamed by man. So later on in the novel, we will see references to the plan with a capital P. This plan, I think, we can identify with this patriarchal order, and that by allowing, so the Jew here wants to understand that the patriarchal order is dry, is experiencing a kind of senility or of decline, and that a woman is needed, or that the sort of the feminine aspect is needed, which is we saw that in Down Below certainly as well. The idea of Carrington being added to the male Christian Trinity, adding that woman figure in there as a kind of renewal of the order or structure of the world is something we get here as well. But yeah, so here we have, I think this is interesting too, the Jewish figure is almost a kind of traitor to patriarchy, and is, I think, an interesting way that the patriarchal order itself is seen as contradictory, and that there is, the Jew is the figure within that order who recognizes that the order, it needs to change and needs to be modified. So throughout the novel, we will see, or one way that we could read what's happening in the novel is that a woman will be brought into the order, and that the old order, this sort of patriarchal order that led to war and domination and the Holocaust as well, there's definitely elements or references back to the horrors of the Holocaust and the Nazi regime, not explicitly, but kind of haunts the work in a lot of ways. And so I think there's a lot of awareness of the need to destroy the old order, and then out of this sweet chaos that will result from a kind of feminist sort of magical revolution, out of that chaos, a new chaotic order never before dreamed by man can emerge. All right, and then jumping quite a bit later in the narrative, we can look at start looking at just a little bit of the relationship between the Zacharias, who's also referred to as 105 in the boarding school that he's in. The Jewish children there are referred to by numbers, which is certainly one of the echoes of the Holocaust that we get throughout the story. So Zacharias, the Jewish Hungarian boy, is here dreaming of the woman that he's as a child here. He's meeting in a dream the woman that he's eventually destined to be with. All right, so we read, they watched the stirring weed expectantly. Soon we shall know, said the little girl. Now do you remember what you gave me? 5 iron nails, a stick of cinnamon, and a skein of black wool. So these 3 objects, we have one example here of ritual objects that appear throughout the novel, and these 3 can definitely be understood through their esoteric correspondences. So as will become increasingly clear as we go on here, these can also all be understood as corresponding with the astrological sign of Aries. So Aries is a fire sign ruled by Mars, and the sun is exalted in Aries. And Aries, the symbol for the sign is a ram. So the number 5 is associated with the planet Mars in kind of modern Hermetic Kabbalistic symbolism. And we see a lot of 5s, especially in Chapter 4, and I guess into Chapter 5 as well, but especially in 4 here, we see the number 5 repeated quite a bit. 5 is a number that can be associated with Mars. There's some other potentially interesting resonances with the number 5 that we can kind of read throughout the text, but we're not going to get into that here. Iron is the metal of Mars. Even the nails here, and something that pierces, is certainly a martial kind of object. So 5 iron nails, very definitely a symbol of Mars. A stick of cinnamon. Cinnamon, it corresponds with the sun, and the sun is exalted within Aries. And then the skein of black wool. So the wool is about to be associated with a black ram that is connected to the sign of Aries. All right, and then continuing on, the water was parting. Two curved horns, then the head and neck of a black ram emerged. In its mouth hung a pair of golden scales. The little girl drew a circle on the ground and filled it with different polygons. Then, pointing first to the left and then to the right, she exclaimed, "Fire and air, you and I, little brother. Our mother is earth and our father is water. In 12 houses we lived. Through the 12 houses we will pass. When we hold hands across the circle, yours is fire and mine is air." All right, so here we get, first of all, we see the black ram appear in the painting there, Chiki Tampei. All right, and so we're getting very explicitly astrological symbolism here. Now, we already mentioned Aries. We see that on the left there in the diagram. So that, the 2 curved horns, the head and neck of a black ram. So that's the sign of Aries that we see on the left. So we're clearly looking at the diagram oriented so that Aries is the first house, which is a pretty standard way of presenting the zodiac. So black ram, Aries, and then the golden scales hanging in its mouth are an image of Libra, the sign exactly opposite in the zodiac. So Aries is a fire sign and Libra is an air sign. So we get the fire and air here. And the ram holding the scales in the mouth obviously points towards the unification of Aries and Libra, or of fire and air. So this circle that the girl is drawing on the ground, and we'll see that recurring. Zacharias will draw this on the blackboard while he's in school the next day after he wakes up from the dream, filled with polygons. Is the zodiac and various, although we don't get specific details about what the polygons are, but the various geometric relationships that obtain within the zodiac, the various aspects and things like that, or perhaps what's being referenced here, or I think we can think of in Carrington's paintings those various overlapping geometric forms and that have a very definite cosmological significance that we see all throughout her works. So pointing first to the left and then to the right, she's obviously pointing towards Aries and then towards Libra, exclaims, "Fire and air, you and I, little brother." And now we get, and then, the last quote there, in 12 houses we lived, through 12 houses we will pass. So the 12 signs of the zodiac, as well as the 12 houses within horoscopic astrology. So she says, when we hold hands across the circle, yours is fire and mine is air. So Zacharias is associated with the black ram and in the sign of Aries, where the little girl is associated with Libra and air. So he's fire and she's air. Though we will also see quite a bit of interchanging and exchanging of these identities throughout the text, which is quite interesting. They never settle down into a simple, stable binary relationship. And so we never get a clear sense of male and female, and in a lot of cases, some of the associations between the boy and girl are interchanged with what we would expect. So there's always, I think, a very critical kind of awareness of the relationship, the representation of gender, and the relationship between gender going on throughout the text, which is a quite interesting element. Then we also have this reference to earth and water here as well. She says, "Our mother is earth and our father is water." So the earth, as not clear just from what we have here, but as will later become clear in the text, earth is being associated with the sign of Capricorn that we see up at the very top, and the element of earth. Capricorn is the goat, which I briefly referenced, the ship that's made of the goat's skin and bones, and the bones of the goat will also be associated with the planet Saturn, which is the planet that rules Capricorn. And the bones themselves are traditional. In the skeleton is a traditional association of Saturn, as we also saw in the map of the human animal there. And then there's not a lot of very explicitly Cancerian symbolism there, but I think it's pretty easy to make the connection with water and the sign of Cancer, so that we have this kind of fourfold relationship between the 4 cardinal signs of the zodiac and the 4 elements that each is connected to. And I think that's will be a helpful structuring, a helpful diagram and a helpful structure to understand a lot of the transformations and relationships that occur throughout the text. And this is also quite personal. Now, in the original, I ended up cutting it out just for the sake of time, but originally when I recorded the first part of this video, I did like a 10-minute reading of Carrington's birth chart. So we won't do the whole reading here, but I just want to point out that we can see that she has her sun and 3 other planets, including Mars and Venus and Mercury, all in the sign of Aries. So she has herself has a very strong association with Aries. She also has her sun in Libra, and not only that, but Chiki, her husband, his sun was in Libra. So we see even an interesting kind of gender interchange, where in the story it's the boy, Zacharias, who's associated with Aries, and the girl is associated with Libra. For Carrington and Chiki, it's the other way around. She's Aries and he's Libra. Though I think it's also quite interesting that her moon is most probably in Libra. We don't have an exact birth time for Carrington, so it's possible that if she was born like very shortly after midnight, her moon could be at the end of Virgo, but very likely in Libra. She also has Saturn in Cancer, which is rather interesting to think about in relation to some of the other symbols. But I think we can definitely really read that Aries and Libra as the relationship between her and Chiki if we wanted to read it autobiographically. But we can also see almost like Carrington's own sun and moon there, as if this is all taking place inside of a single person, which I think that ambiguity about relationship and unity and duality is an interesting thread here as well. We also get very explicit associations between not only is Zacharias a Hungarian Jew, but we also have at one point the little girl names her 3 brothers, and Carrington, who had 3 brothers, 2 of the brothers have the same names as Carrington's brothers. So the biographical associations between the 2 characters are basically impossible to avoid. And then especially when we think about the painting, which is explicitly named for her husband and depicts her and her husband, as well as a number of symbols from the narrative. But again, I think it's important not to reduce the narrative down to simply being a kind of like encoded or symbolic narrative about her relationship, but almost the other way around, of taking her biography and then expanding and extrapolating that out into something more esoterically and magically significant, rather than reducing this very complex, surreal, esoteric story down to a mere kind of expression of something happening in her life. Another detail from the painting here. Here we see a 12-sided figure, obviously referencing the zodiac, and a number of symbolic images around. So just for the sake of time, we won't spend too long with them, but we can certainly see both astrological references here, as well as some connections to some of the things that happen in the story. Though not always. I mean, there's certainly images here that aren't directly reflected in the story, at least as far as I've been able to tell. So there's a kind of complex relationship between the painting and the novella. All right, and then just picking right back up where we left off with the dream and the appearance of the black ram holding the scales out of the water there within the dream. The girl handed the boy a sharp triangular stone, which he took in his left hand. Kneeling before the ram, he caught its spiral horn in his right hand, twisting back its head and exposing the beating pulses of its neck. He cut its throat with the triangular stone. The girl caught the blood in her cupped hand, saying, "Drink the scarlet milk of paradise, little brother. It is ours." So we have a sacrifice here, and not the only one. This is an image that will recur several times throughout the story, and other quite similar images will recur several times throughout the story. Interesting, this image of a scarlet milk, I think, is an interesting surrealist image, and an interchange between the red and white, which could certainly be read alchemically. Let's see, continuing on. He bent his head and drank the blood out of her cupped hands. When he had also drunk, he said, "The old gods are our food. The new gods will be revealed to us in time and out of time. The old gods are dead. Earth, the goat, will renew the lifeblood of the myth and will violate the garden of paradise. The goat will deliver us the new myth, and she will be clothed with animal, vegetable, and mineral. Nothing dead, alive, or unborn will she lack, and nothing on this earth or in the 9 planets around will remain untouched by her or she by them. So here, I think we're obviously touching on this idea of the overthrowing of the plan, the patriarchal order, the old order that resulted in war and domination, and I think as will become more important for Carrington as she goes on later in life in ecological destruction as well. This also, I think, really resonates with some of the things we said towards the end of the surrealism video. If any of you anyone watching this has seen that about Andre Breton right around this same time during World War II and afterwards, searching for a new myth and a new form of myth that could express a renewed vision of human civilization here. I think it's quite interesting to see Carrington interested in some of these same topics of the old gods being dead here and the new gods coming into the world here. Being an interesting way of expressing that, the sort of the replacement of one set of myth with another. All right, and then skipping over so much symbolism, including a lot of really interesting alchemical symbolism that we just don't have the time or space to really unpack. I just want to give a look at a final excerpt from the text here. So this is from chapter 5, shortly before Zacharias makes the sort of final leg of his quest to find the stone door, which... Interestingly, we never actually see him united with the woman, but it's implied, or that we see that she is on the other side of the door. There's all this other kind of complex stuff between the door separating the real world from the land of the dead, and a lot of other very complex sort of things being layered over this idea. But anyways, just on the right, so just before he makes this final leg of the journey, he's captured by a giant in a scene very reminiscent of a fairy tale, though this is also where the goat ship is built that it carries him to the stone door. So anyways, we're picking up mid-conversation with the giant here. A whole could have 2 bodies, said Zacharias. So we can certainly read in the 2 bodies, the idea of the man and the woman, Zacharias and the unnamed woman that he seeks to be united with. The giant responds, the masters would never permit that, answered Harelip. Harelip is the giant. They would arrange such a terrible fight between the 2 bodies that knowledge would always be obscured by hate. One would destroy the other, so only one half would be truly alive. So we can see here the idea of the masters, not allowing the feminine into the whole or into their plan. These masters are powerful, said Zacharias. Their power lies in the unit. The belief is one. Unit, of course, being this from the same root that we get the word unity. Possibly this is Pythagorean symbolism. The Pythagoreans had a concept of the one as the unit. That which all other numbers are built out of. Which possibly is what's happening there, or possibly the reference there. Anyways, the giant says, "You will be destroyed for knowing that. Why? Because as long as a man thinks that he is whole in his one body, he can never achieve the wisdom which would endanger the plan. Believing that he is one keeps him in perpetual combat with another half of himself. Once he could see and accept the other half without combat, the plan would totter like a 9-pin. That, remarked Zacharias, would not meet with the master's approval. It would not be permitted." Right, so that the masters here, of course, or we could interpret them as the 3 men, that we saw from chapter 1, the European, the Jew, and the Chinaman. Especially the European and the Chinaman and their plan, which is the patriarchal order that is so harmful to the world and needs to be replaced and overturned. So in this last longer paragraph from the giant here, I think we see something really interesting where, at first, where he's saying as long as a man thinks he is whole in his one body, he can never achieve the wisdom that would endanger, right? That this could, I think, suggest a very kind of heteronormative sort of reading where a man and a woman are each halves of a single whole, and that the male requires the female in order to be complete. But then something much more interesting happens here. The giant says that believing that he is one keeps him in perpetual combat with another half of himself. That it's not merely that man doesn't understand that he needs, the feminine also, but that also that in believing that he's one, he doesn't see that he himself is also divided, which I think this touches on images that we've already really seen here of especially this sort of darker kind of figure that we saw in a number of Carrington's paintings, that there is an aspect of ourselves that we, in believing that we are simply whole or simply one, we deny a part of ourselves that we may not want to acknowledge. Certainly, I think connected to Carrington's interest in psychoanalysis and some of her own experiences with mental illness and the division of her own mind and her own personality, and I think also really touching on that questioning of a single stable individual identity that we saw in the essay "What is a Woman?" So I think I think a lot of really interesting and complex things are happening here. That at the same time that the feminine needs to be allowed into the order and to destroy that patriarchal dominance of the male. The men also need to understand that they themselves are split and are multiple, and they contain a part of themselves that they don't acknowledge and that they remain in combat with. So on the one hand, we have a kind of a unification of the two, the unification of the male and female into a new whole, but we also have the recognition of a division of the apparent one, the apparent whole that is each individual self, and seeing it as itself, split and multiple and inherently contradictory, but that seeing and accepting that other half, seeing that there is this dark, aspect of ourselves that we don't want to acknowledge, that is also threatening to the plan, and that somehow these two processes, kind of external unification with an internal recognition of division, are in a way almost the same move that simultaneously overturns the plan and overturns the patriarchal order. So that'll wrap us up for talking about the stone door here. We could really spend a couple hours, really going through the text and pulling apart all the different threads and seams. But I think that particular thread there, and this, especially the kind of revolutionary dimension of this alchemical unification and the feminist concerns here and the astrological symbolism, I think just really brings together a lot of things that we've already talked about here. All right, and then just to close off here, I think perhaps because that really brief partial look at the stone door without any kind of real conclusion or summary there was maybe unsatisfying. I just want to look at a very similar scene, a very resonant scene from one of Carrington's short stories, A Mexican Fairy Tale. This is from the very end of the story here. So I won't set up what's happening here. I think it's not extremely important and will become obvious as we just read through it. A flight of hummingbirds passed, rushing toward the voice. "The ancestor is calling us," said Maria, listening. "We must go back to her." They crawled under the belly of the stone jaguar. Mole was standing there, tall and black, holding a silver sword in one of his big hands. In the other he held a rope. He bound the two children tightly together and pulled them into the presence of the great bird. Bird, snake, goddess, there she sat, all the colors of the rainbow and full of little windows with faces looking out, singing the sounds of everything alive and dead, all this like a swarming of bees, a million movements in one still body. Maria and Juan stared at each other till Mole cut the rope that bound them together. They lay on the floor looking up at the evening star shining through a shaft in the roof. The evening star, of course, is the planet Venus here, which is significant. Mole was piling branches of scented wood on a brazier. When this was ready, the bird snake mother shot a tongue of fire out of her mouth, and the wood burst into flame. "Maria," called a million voices, "jump into the fire and take Juan by the hand. He must burn with you so that you both shall be one whole person. This is love." They jumped into the fire and ascended in smoke through the shaft on the roof to join the evening star. Juan, Marie, they were one whole being. They will return again to Earth, one being called Quetzalcoatl. Juan Marie keep returning, so this story has no end. So a lot of that, I'm sure, is quite reminiscent and comprehensible from what we've already said here. The unification, again, this image of the feathered serpent and Quetzalcoatl, which is what the united male and female characters here are transformed into. Though we also get this circular sense that they return to Earth and then ascend again. So a very alchemical sense that unification and the overcoming of duality is just one phase in a cycle, but never a complete and final unification. But this constant, sort of cycling from the cosmic back to the earthly, and from unity back to duality. I also just really love at on the left-hand side there that last the image of the bird snake goddess. I think it's an incredibly psychedelic image. And we know that Carrington did do some experimentation with psychedelic substances, and I don't know. I find it, and this was written in the 1970s, when I know that some of that experimentation took place, and I find it hard to believe that wasn't that those experiences were not influential there on this image of the bird snake goddess, all the colors of the rainbow and full of little windows with faces looking out, singing the sounds of everything alive and dead. It's a really great psychedelic image there. Also, we have bees there, other images that we've already seen. All right, so thanks for watching. That'll finish up with part 2 here, and we will pick up again in part 3. We will look at Carrington's novel, The Hearing Trumpet, which is one of my all-time favorite novels, and I'm excited to be able to talk about it and to continue to pull together a lot of these sort of themes and images that we've already been talking about here. So hopefully back within the next week with that, and thanks for your patience. And especially with some of the sort of disorganization in this video here, but nevertheless, I hope that for those of you interested in Carrington, this has been a useful discussion. And see you again soon and talk about The Hearing Trumpet.